My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old. I'm a working professional living alone in an apartment. My family consists of my mom and my brother George. My mom has been living alone ever since my dad passed away from illness 5 years ago. George got married 2 years ago. I thought he'd settled down after marriage, but he seems to be working harder than ever. While we do keep in touch through calls, our busy schedules make it tough to spend time with Mom. Then an occasion for all of us to gather came around. It was time for a visit to Dad's grave. Seeing Mom after a long time, she looked like she'd lost some weight but was still smiling as ever. George brought along his wife, Violet. I haven't spoken much with Violet, but I find her to be friendly and kind. She's a stay-at-home wife by her own choice, likely taking good care of my hard-working brother every day. Even now, she was listening to Mom and helping her make coffee. As we sipped our coffee, we caught up on each other's lives, and it was about time to leave. "Mom, why don't we rebuild this house and you come live with us?" George suddenly looked serious and made this suggestion. Both Mom and I were caught off guard. "The house is old, and it must be inconvenient for you, Mom. We can look after you, and besides, I've always wanted to do something for you, Mom." "It would cost a lot, you know. I make decent money, and we have Dad's inheritance. Now's the time to use it." Realizing how much thought George had put into this, I felt grateful. I wondered if there was something I could do too. That's when I noticed Violet's face tense up for a moment. "Don't worry. I've discussed it with Violet before, and she's okay with it," George said. In an instant, Violet's usual kind smile returned. "Indeed, I think it's a great idea." She had returned to her usual gentle smile. I brushed it off as my imagination and took another sip of coffee. Mom pondered for a bit. "If you'll tell me that much," and finally accepted George's offer. "You can stay with me while the house is under construction." "Really? Are you sure?" "Why hesitate? I have space and it's not an issue." After that, I also suggested that I use Dad's inheritance to help with the funds. "Save that money until you get married." That's what Mom and George told me. Well, I couldn't argue with that. So plans were made for Mom to live with George and Violet, providing the land and contributing to the rebuilding costs. 6 months later, I received news that the new house was complete and a moving date was set. Today is finally the moving day. While cleaning up after breakfast, I talked to Mom, who was busy packing. "I'm sorry I can't help with the move. I've told Violet I can't get time off from work." "Don't worry, dear. George and Violet are there, and we have the movers as well." She smiles and says it's okay, and my heart feels a little lighter. Her voice sounded cheerful. Seeing Mom so spirited while packing made me realize just how much she'd lost her zest for life after Dad passed away. I couldn't be more grateful to George. I was surprised when George said that, but honestly, I was overjoyed. After Patrick passed away, I thought I'd be living quietly on my own, but now I'm wondering if I deserve to be this happy. I just laughed and said, "Of course you do." My mom grabbed her packed suitcase and left the house with a spring in her step. Somehow, I managed to dodge overtime and started heading home before sundown. I wonder if she's having a good time with George right now. Given how much she was looking forward to it, she must be. While pondering what to give them as a housewarming gift, I hear my name. "Emma." I stop walking and look toward the voice. In the dim light, I see my mom with a sad look on her face. Her morning purse is hanging heavily on her slender arm. "Mom?" I was surprised and ran over to Mom, who looked down. "Mom, what are you doing here?" When I press her, she says, "Living together isn't going to work. Violet asked me to leave." That's what Violet told me. Feeling disoriented but seeing my nearly tearful mom, I take her home. After making her some hot milk, she begins to relax a little and tells me what happened. According to Mom, she went to the new house as planned. There were movers bustling about, and Violet was there. "Violet, looking forward to living with you," she greeted with a smile. In response, Violet looked at her disapprovingly and even clicked her tongue. When Mom looked puzzled, Violet said, "I can't live with her. She needs to leave. Why would I want to share my home with some stranger?" "But you agreed before." "Look, I said yes just because of George. We've only been married 2 years. Can't you read the room?" At that point, my blood boiled. I remembered Violet's strained expression. Regret filled my mind, about not picking up on it then and not being with Mom today. So, where's George now? Mom shook her head at my question. According to Violet, George had gone on a sudden business trip and wasn't home. I couldn't take Violet's selfishness and George's irresponsibility anymore. I called George. After a few rings, George picked up. His voice was so bright. Hey, Emma, what's up? Man, I had to go on this sudden trip just when we finished the renovations. Tough for you, huh? I'll make it up to you, promise. His upbeat tone made me uneasy, considering the situation. However, I was so angry that I couldn't help but blame George. George, what are you talking about? I told Violet I couldn't make it today because of work. I heard a small gasp from the other end. I told her to say sorry for me because of my sudden trip. Mom's been kicked out by Violet. She suddenly said she couldn't live with her anymore. What are you doing, George? George went silent for a moment. Is Mom okay? She's devastated. It's heartbreaking to see. I'm really sorry. I'll talk to Violet. With a subdued voice, George ended the call. I went to the bedroom where Mom was sitting on the bed, looking lost, a stark contrast to her cheerfulness this morning. I walked up to her and held her hand. Mom, let's continue to live together. Looking away from me, she hesitated. But, I stammered, don't worry about it. I want you here, and it looks like George was also in the dark. You've done nothing wrong. Hearing my reassurance, Mom finally gave a faint smile. The next evening, George called. Apparently, he had confronted Violet as soon as he got home, but initially, she kept denying everything. After persistently questioning her, she finally revealed her true feelings. It's not my fault. I thought we were going to live together way down the line, but then George said I was okay with it. In a twist of events, Violet let her emotions run wild and went off the rails. I love our life as it is, just the two of us. Isn't it better without Stella? We don't have to worry about anything. We can focus on having kids. I'm seething with anger at her selfishness and childish way of thinking. Sorry. What good does it do to apologize to me? I get it. I'll apologize to Mom once this is all sorted out. The phrase, once this is all sorted out, made me furrow my brows. George? I have something in mind, just give me some time. Seeing George appear to have made up his mind, I nodded in understanding. A few days later, my phone rang while I was relaxing on my day off. Violet's name flashed on the screen. Hello? As soon as I answered, Violet demanded to speak to Mom. Ignoring the audacity of her request, I simply responded, I can't do that. Look, I know you're mad. I regret what I did, okay? I was out of line. I want to apologize to Stella. I want to make amends, but it seems like Stella has blocked my calls. I couldn't help but snicker at Violet's justification. I think Mom has every reason to be hurt, you know. Violet's nose seemed to twitch as if she was about to cry. This just felt sketchy, to be honest. You were the one who kicked her out in the first place, Violet. Just because George mentioned divorce, you act on a whim. Upon hearing that, I knew about the divorce talk. Violet was utterly flustered. Why? Rather than backing down, she became infuriated. So, this was her true character. And here I thought she was a nice person. I thought she cared about George and Mom. That's why I'm apologizing. If Stella forgives me, this whole issue will be resolved. I couldn't help but laugh at how she sounded like she was admitting that she just wanted to avoid divorce. Why would you even think of doing such a thing? The house is in Mom's name. She even helped with the finances. Did you think you could just kick her out and live happily ever after with George? He initially wanted to live with Mom to honor her, you know? And you treat her like this? You were really short-sighted. Annoyed, Violet growled in response. Emma, I heard from behind me, turning to see Mom standing there. She gestured for me to hand her the phone. I looked at her with concern, but she gave me a reassuring smile. Hello, Violet. Stella! Finally, you picked up. You've reconsidered, haven't you? I'm really sorry. So you're coming back, right? All I needed was for you to care about George. That would have been enough." "Stella, what are you saying? Just come back already." Mom sighed deeply. "You really are self-centered. It's like dealing with a child. Stay out of my life from now on. You'll get what's coming to you for making my son sad." Without waiting for Violet's response, Mom handed the phone back to me. I could see relief wash over Mom's face, and I felt a bit more at ease myself. When Violet took the phone, her breathing had only gotten more erratic. You're making a fool out of me." I was utterly stunned by her enraged voice and couldn't help but sigh. Even if by some miracle you reconcile with Mom, George's feelings won't change, you know. "What? You asked George to go on a business trip when you knew I couldn't help with the move, right? What are you talking about?" "George and we both know everything now." With that, I hung up the phone. Sure enough, a flurry of incoming calls followed, but I ignored them. It was almost over. I decided to peacefully await the end with Mom. Eventually, George's divorce was finalized. Violet assumed George initiated the divorce because she'd kicked Mom out of the house. But of course, George couldn't forgive that either. The real reasons for the divorce were Violet's attitude towards marriage and her affair. Worse, the other man was George's boss. I later found out their relationship had started when Violet was still working at George's company. Truly despicable. George had discovered the affair soon after they were married and even gathered evidence through a private investigator. If it were me, I would have left the moment I found out, but George seemed to genuinely love Violet. She barely did any housework or cooking. She was only interested in living lavishly and paid no attention to George. On top of that, she'd been having an affair with her husband's boss even before they were married. Still, George had hoped she would eventually realize her mistake and come back to him. Another big reason for moving in with Mom was that George wanted Violet to shape up as a housewife. He'd even hoped that by restricting her movements, she'd break off her affair. But Violet was oblivious to all of this. She took advantage of me not coming to isolate Mom by sending George away on a business trip. She thought she could do whatever she wanted then. Everything was for her own selfish lifestyle. Violet had completely underestimated George. When George found out all these facts, he said he felt whatever love was left in him vanish. Honestly, I think George is too gullible, and his thinking was shallow. But knowing his feelings for Violet, I couldn't say anything. George acted swiftly afterward. Armed with piles of evidence, he went to a lawyer and demanded compensation from Violet and her lover in the divorce settlement. Violet, who had neither savings nor a job, was now facing hellish days being sued for compensation not only by George, but also by her lover's wife. It seems she got dumped by her affair partner too. Now she's back at her parents' home. She's got to share the space with Violet's sibling and their spouse, so life must be uncomfortable. Making up for all the time she took off, no, probably working even harder than that, she's bound to have a tough time. George then apologized to Mom again. I had filled Mom in on George's situation to some extent, but he spoke about what happened in his own words. Mom listened in silence. "You did nothing wrong. You must have had a hard time," she said, shedding tears. George too bowed his head and cried. 2 years have passed, and George is now living with Mom in the renovated house. At first, it took a while for things to settle, but now she's back to her cheerful old self, smiling more and more each day. George says he's done with women and shakes his head, but he adds that if he ever gets another chance, he wants someone who's open, honest, and treats Mom well. To this, Mom chuckles. "Someone who cherishes you, that's what matters most," making George give a wry smile. I've been visiting more often, and the three of us share meals. Today is one of those days. But today, it's not just the three of us. I assure the nervous man walking beside me, it's okay. With a smile, will Mom and George be surprised? They must have had a clue when I said I had someone to introduce. Looking at the ring on my left hand, I smile. Seeing the familiar rooftop in the distance, I quicken my pace, holding his hand.